On the morning of June 10, 1912, in the small town of Villisca, Iowa, a neighbor named Mary Peckham noted with concern that the house at 508 East 2nd Street was unusually still. The family within, the Moores, were early risers, yet their home remained silent and the windows were dark with drawn curtains. After several hours, her concern prompted a call to the brother of the man of the house. What was found inside that small, white-framed home would become one of the most brutal and inscrutable crimes in American history. Inside, 8 people, 2 adults and 6 children had been systematically bludgeoned to death as they slept. The murder weapon, an axe belonging to the family, was left at the scene, wiped but not clean. No credible suspect was ever convicted. No definitive motive was ever established. In 1912, Villisca was a modest but prosperous railroad town situated in the rolling farmland of Montgomery County, Iowa. With a population of just over 2,000, it was a self-contained community where lives were intertwined through commerce, church, and social clubs. It was a town built on the predictable rhythms of agriculture and industry, a place where violent crime was an abstract concept, something that happened in distant, larger cities. The residents of Villisca generally did not lock their doors at night. The community operated on a foundation of assumed safety and mutual trust, an assumption that was about to be irrevocably shattered. At the center of this story is the Moore family. Josiah B. Moore, known to friends and neighbors as Joe, was 43 years old. He was a prominent local businessman, the owner of a successful hardware and farm implement store. He was known as an industrious, ambitious, and well-respected man, though some in the competitive business community considered him aggressive. His wife, Sarah Montgomery Moore, was 39. She was a dedicated homemaker and a significant figure in the social and religious life of the town, particularly within the Presbyterian Church. Together, they represented a portrait of early 20th century Midwestern stability and aspiration. The Moore household was completed by their 4 children. The eldest was Herman, age 11, followed by Catherine, age 10. Then came the 2 youngest boys, 7-year-old Boyd and 5-year-old Paul. By all accounts, they were a typical family of the era, their lives revolving around school, chores, and church activities. They lived in a simple, 2-story wood frame house on a residential street, a home without electricity or indoor plumbing, but one that was known to be orderly and well kept. On the evening of the murders, the Moore family had 2 overnight guests. They were Lena and Ina Stillinger, ages 12 and 8, respectively. The Stillingers were the daughters of Joseph and Sarah Stillinger and lived just a short distance from the Moores. The girls were friends with the Moore children, and that Sunday, after attending a church function with them, they asked their parents for permission to stay the night at the Moore residence. Their parents agreed. It was a common and unremarkable occurrence in a town where children often moved between the homes of friends and neighbors. The day before the discovery, Sunday, June 9th, had been a day of community celebration for Villisca's Presbyterian congregation. The church hosted its annual Children's Day program, an event co-organized and directed by Sarah Moore. The Moore children, along with Lena and Ina Stillinger, all participated, delivering speeches and performing recitations for the assembled parishioners. The program concluded around 9:30 p.m., after which the Moore family and the Stillinger girls walked the few blocks back to their home. They had milk and cookies before retiring for the night. This was the last time any of them would be seen alive. Sometime after the family fell asleep, likely between midnight and 2 a.m., an unknown individual approached the Moore residence. The person took an axe, weighing approximately 10 pounds, from the family's own coal shed in the backyard. Entry into the house was not forced. The doors were likely unlocked. Once inside, the killer moved with a chilling deliberateness through the darkened home. Evidence found later suggests the individual carried a kerosene lamp, its wick turned down low to emit only a faint, guiding light, preventing a sudden flare that might awaken the occupants. The killer proceeded directly up the narrow, creaking staircase to the second floor. The first room entered was the master bedroom, where Josiah and Sarah Moore were sleeping. Using the blunt, flat side of the axe, known as the pole, the attacker delivered a series of catastrophic blows to their heads. Forensic estimations would later place the number of strikes for each victim at between 20 and 30. The violence was so extreme that it left deep gouges in the plaster ceiling above the bed, marks made by the upswing of the axe. Josiah Moore's face was rendered unrecognizable. From the parents' bedroom, the killer moved to the adjacent room, where the 4 more children slept. Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul were all attacked in the same manner as their parents. They were killed in their beds with the same brutal efficiency, each receiving multiple blows to the head from the back of the axe. The fact that 8 people were attacked in a small, resonant wooden house without any of them apparently being roused to fight or flee remains one of the most perplexing aspects of the crime. All victims appeared to have been killed in a state of sleep. After ensuring everyone on the second floor was dead, the killer descended the stairs. The final targets were in the downstairs guest bedroom, located just off the parlor. Here, the visiting Stillinger sisters, Lena and Ina, were asleep. They were dispatched with the same weapon and the same method. The attack was consistent and methodical. All 8 occupants of the house were now dead. The killer did not immediately flee the scene. Instead, a series of strange, ritualistic actions were performed. The head of every victim was covered with bedclothes or a piece of nearby clothing. The killer then moved through the house and systematically covered every mirror and pane of glass in the doors with various articles of clothing found in dressers and closets. This act suggested a desire to eliminate all reflective surfaces within the home. In the downstairs bedroom where the Stillinger girls lay, 12-year-old Lena's body was moved after her death. Her nightgown was pushed up to her waist, and she was positioned in a way that exposed her lower body. An examination by doctors later concluded that she had not been sexually assaulted. A small defensive wound was noted on her arm, the only indication that any of the victims may have briefly stirred before being killed. Ina's body was also moved into a peculiar, posed position. Before leaving, the killer left behind more baffling evidence. A 4-pound slab of uncooked bacon from the icebox was taken and leaned against the wall in the downstairs bedroom, next to the bloody axe. On the kitchen table, a plate of uneaten food was found, alongside a bowl filled with bloody water, indicating the killer may have washed their hands. 2 spent cigarettes were later discovered in the attic, suggesting the perpetrator might have hidden there, waiting for the family to return from church and fall asleep. Sometime before dawn, the killer locked the doors from the inside, took the house keys, and departed, leaving behind a scene of silent, orderly carnage. The residents of Villisca would awaken to a normal Monday morning, entirely unaware of the event that had transpired in the heart of their town. The discovery began at approximately 8 a.m. on Monday, June 10th. After receiving the call from Mary Peckham, Joe Moore's brother, Ross Moore, arrived at the house. He used his own key to let himself in. After peering into the downstairs bedroom and seeing 2 sheet-covered figures and blood on the bedstead, he immediately retreated and contacted the town marshal, Henry Hank Horton. Horton's subsequent search of the house confirmed the scale of the tragedy. As he exited the home, he informed Ross, "Somebody has been murdered in every bed." News of the massacre spread through Villisca with alarming speed. In the hours that followed, the crime scene was irrevocably compromised. Hundreds of townspeople, driven by a mixture of horror and morbid curiosity, walked through the Moore home before it could be properly secured. They touched walls, furniture, and even lifted the sheets covering the victims, contaminating any potential evidence that might have existed. Early 20th century forensics were rudimentary, but the complete lack of crowd control in the initial hours effectively destroyed any chance of collecting fingerprints or other trace evidence. The investigation began under a significant handicap. The formal inquest revealed few answers. All 8 victims had died from blunt force trauma to the head. The strange artifacts left at the scene, the covered mirrors, the slab of bacon, the bowl of bloody water, offered no clear insight into a motive. Robbery was ruled out, as Sarah Moore's purse and Joe's wallet containing cash were left untouched. The sheer brutality seemed to preclude a simple crime of passion. The community was left with a horrifying act of violence that was as senseless as it was savage. The investigation, under intense pressure, soon focused on several individuals. One theory centered on Reverend Lynn George Jacqueline Kelly, an itinerant English minister who was in Villisca on the weekend of the murders. Kelly, who had a history of mental illness and was known for his strange behavior, had attended the Children's Day service on Sunday evening. He left Villisca on a train at 5:19 a.m. on Monday, hours before the bodies were discovered. Fellow passengers later claimed that Kelly made statements indicating he knew of the murders, remarking that 8 people had been butchered in their beds. Weeks later, he wrote a series of rambling letters to investigators about the case and was eventually arrested. In 1917, after a lengthy interrogation, he confessed, claiming God had told him to slay utterly. He quickly recanted this confession, and after 2 separate trials, the juries failed to convict him. He was acquitted. Investigators also considered Frank F. Jones, a prominent Villisca resident and Iowa state senator. Jones was a direct business competitor of Joe Moore, and their relationship was reportedly hostile. Moore had worked for Jones for several years before leaving to open his own, more successful hardware store, taking a lucrative dealership with him. Rumors also circulated of an affair between Joe Moore and Jones's daughter-in-law, though this was never substantiated. Jones had a clear alibi for the night of the murders, and no physical evidence ever linked him to the crime. Despite this, suspicion lingered over him and his son for years, fueled by local politics and gossip. A more expansive explanation suggests that the Villisca murders were not an isolated event, but part of a pattern of similar crimes committed by a transient serial killer. Historians have identified a string of unsolved axe murders of entire families across the Midwest between 1911 and 1912, in locations such as Colorado Springs, Colorado, Ellsworth, Kansas, and Monmouth, Illinois. These crimes shared a distinct modus operandi. Victims were killed in their beds with the blunt end of an axe owned by the family. Kerosene lamps were used for light with the chimneys removed, and reflective surfaces were often covered. The theory posits that an unknown individual traveled the railway lines, stopping in small towns to commit these acts before disappearing without a trace. In this scenario, the Moore family was not targeted for any personal reason, but was simply the victim of a random predatory killer. Over a century has passed since the murders in Villisca, Iowa. The investigations, grand jury hearings, and trials that followed the discovery produced no convictions and no resolution. The evidence left at the scene, the axe, the bacon, the covered mirrors, has been analyzed for decades, yet has yielded no consensus. The identity of the figure who moved through the Moore house on that June night, extinguishing 8 lives with such methodical violence, remains unknown. The motives, whether rooted in personal vengeance, religious mania, or the random cruelty of a passing killer, are lost to time. The house on East 2nd Street still stands, a quiet monument to an act of profound and disturbing violence. The central questions of who committed this crime, and why, remain unanswered, sealed in the silence of that night.